Ethan Cole's hands were bleeding. His daughter hadn't eaten in 16 hours. And the only thing standing between them and eviction was a toolbox older than his marriage had been. He didn't know the woman standing beside the broken BMW was worth more than his entire neighborhood combined. He didn't know her family's investment firm held the debt that was crushing him. And he sure as hell didn't know that refusing her money tonight would be the most expensive decision he'd ever make, or the only one that would save them both. This is a story about what happens when two people from opposite ends of the world collide on a road that shouldn't have brought them together. If you're watching from your city tonight, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night everything changed. The rain came down in sheets that November night, the kind of rain that felt personal, like the sky had a grudge. Ethan Cole stood under the flickering streetlight outside Murphy's Auto Repair, staring at the envelope in his hand. Final notice. The words were printed in red, which seemed unnecessarily cruel, as if the content wasn't bad enough on its own. "Dad?" He turned. His daughter Mia stood in the doorway of the shop, backpack hanging off one thin shoulder, her jacket 2 sizes too small. She was 9 years old and already knew how to read his face better than anyone ever had. "Yeah, baby." "Are we going home?" Ethan folded the envelope and shoved it into his back pocket, forcing a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Yeah, let's go." The bus ride took 40 minutes. Mia pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city lights blur past, saying nothing. She'd learned not to ask about dinner when he had that look on his face. Ethan sat beside her, his toolbox between his boots, and calculated for the 100th time that week. Rent was 12 days overdue. The medical bills from Mia's pneumonia last winter had gone to collections. His truck had died 3 months ago, which meant he couldn't take side jobs anymore. And Murphy, his boss, his only employer for the last 6 years, had pulled him aside that afternoon and said the words every man with a kid and no backup plan dreads most. "I'm going to have to let you go, Ethan. I'm sorry. Business is it's not there anymore." 2 weeks. Murphy had given him 2 weeks. Ethan had nodded, shook the man's hand, and walked back to his station like his world wasn't caving in. Now sitting on the bus with his daughter's silent hunger filling the space between them, he felt the weight of every choice he'd ever made sitting on his chest. He'd been a good mechanic, a decent father. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't run. He'd done everything you're supposed to do when life puts a kid in your arms and walks out the door. And somehow, it still wasn't enough. The apartment was cold when they got home. Ethan flipped the thermostat, knowing it wouldn't do much. The landlord had been fixing the heating system for 2 months. Mia dropped her backpack by the couch and went straight to the kitchen, opening the fridge out of habit more than hope. "There's soup," Ethan said, moving past her. "The canned kind. I'll heat it up." "It's okay. I'm not that hungry." "Mia." She looked at him, and he saw it. The same look he'd seen in the mirror that morning. The look of someone pretending to be fine when everything was breaking. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I'll make it." She sat. He opened the can, poured it into a pot, and stood there watching it heat, his hands gripping the counter. He wanted to punch something. He wanted to scream. He wanted to call someone and beg for help, but there was no one left to call. His parents were gone. His ex-wife had disappeared into a new life 2 states away. No forwarding address, no child support, no nothing. His friends had their own problems, their own kids, their own drowning. The soup bubbled. He poured it into a bowl, set it in front of Mia, and watched her eat in silence. "Dad? Yeah? Are we going to be okay?" Ethan looked at his daughter, this small, brave person who trusted him to have answers he didn't have, and he lied. "Yeah, baby, we're going to be okay." The call came at 11 that night. Ethan was half asleep on the couch, the TV playing some late-night rerun he wasn't watching, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But work was work, even if it was dying, and he couldn't afford to ignore anything anymore. "Yeah? Is this Ethan Cole?" A woman's voice, young, stressed. "Who's asking?" "My car broke down on Route 17 just past the industrial zone. Someone gave me your number. Said you do roadside repairs." Ethan sat up, rubbing his face. "Lady, I don't even have a truck right now. I can't." "Please." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I've called everyone. No one's coming out here this late. I'll pay you. Cash. Just, please." He looked toward Mia's room. The door was closed. She was asleep. He thought about the envelope in his pocket, the 2 weeks Murphy had given him, the fridge that had 1 can of soup left in it. "Where exactly are you?" She told him. He wrote it down. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, but I'm coming on the bus, so don't expect a miracle." "Thank you. God, thank you." He hung up, grabbed his toolbox, and left. Route 17 at night was a different world. Empty. Industrial. The kind of place where streetlights gave up and shadows took over. Ethan got off the bus 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way, his toolbox banging against his leg with every step. He saw the car before he saw her. A black BMW, sleek and expensive, sitting on the shoulder with its hazards blinking. The kind of car that didn't belong in this part of town. The kind of car that made men like Ethan feel small just looking at it. The woman was standing beside it, arms wrapped around herself, phone in one hand. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and for a second, neither of them said anything. She was young, mid-20s maybe, dark hair pulled back, designer coat that probably cost more than his rent, and an expression that said she was used to problems getting solved quickly. "You're Ethan?" "That's me." She looked at his toolbox, then at him, and he could see her doing the math. No truck, no company logo. Just a man with grease under his fingernails and a toolkit held together with duct tape. "You said it broke down," Ethan said, moving past her toward the hood. "What happened?" "I don't know. It just stopped. The engine light came on, and then it started making this noise, and then it just died." He popped the hood, pulled out a flashlight, and started looking. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but it was still cold, still miserable. He worked in silence, checking hoses, belts, connections. She stood a few feet away, watching him, saying nothing. "Your alternator's shot," he said finally, straightening up. "And your battery's dead. You're not driving this thing tonight? Can you fix it?" "Not here. Not with what I've got." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "You need a tow. And a shop." She stared at the car like it had personally betrayed her. "Great. That's just great." Ethan closed the hood. "You got someone you can call? Someone who can pick you up?" She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "No." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw past the expensive coat and the expensive car, and saw something familiar, someone alone, someone out of options. "There's a diner about a mile up," he said. "It's open all night. You can call a cab from there, or a friend, or whatever." "I don't need a cab." Her voice was sharp now, defensive. "I need my car fixed, and I told you I can't fix it here." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Ethan picked up his toolbox. "That's up to you, lady. I did what I could." He started walking. "Wait." He stopped. She was looking at him now, really looking, and he could see her pride warring with something else. Desperation, maybe. Or just exhaustion. "How much do I owe you?" Ethan thought about the soup can, the eviction notice, Mia's too small jacket. "I didn't fix anything. You don't owe me anything." "You came all the way out here." "Yeah, and I'm leaving the same way." She reached into her purse, pulled out a wallet that probably cost more than his toolbox, and held out $300 bills. "Take it." He stared at the money. He could see the serial numbers from where he stood. Clean, crisp, new bills that had never seen the inside of a pocket like his. "I don't want your money," he said. "Then what do you want?" He looked at her, at the car, at the road stretching empty in both directions. "You got any food in there?" She blinked. "What?" "Food. A sandwich, a granola bar, anything. Lights." She turned, opened the passenger door, and rummaged through a bag in the back seat. She came back holding a small paper bag. "I have a croissant. From this morning. That's it." Ethan took it. "This works." "You're serious?" "Yeah." "You just walked out here, in the rain, at midnight, to fix a stranger's car, and all you want is a leftover croissant." "It's not for me. It's for my daughter. She didn't eat much tonight." Sophie, though he didn't know her name yet, just stared at him. "I'm gonna go," Ethan said, turning away. "Good luck with the car." He walked. This time, she didn't call him back. Skake. Ethan got home just after 1 in the morning. He set the croissant on the counter, stared at it for a long moment, then wrapped it in a napkin and put it in the fridge for Mia to find in the morning. He didn't sleep that night. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline she'd stopped seeing years ago, Sophie Bennett didn't sleep either. She kept thinking about the man with the toolbox, the man who'd refused $300 and taken a stale croissant instead. The man who'd walked away like money didn't matter. She didn't know his last name, didn't know where he lived, didn't know anything about him except that he had a daughter who hadn't eaten much that night. But she knew one thing. She was going to find him. Dicky. Sophie Bennett had been raised in a world where problems were solved with phone calls, where inconvenience was something other people experienced, and where the word no was more of a suggestion than a boundary. Her father ran Bennett Capital Group, a private equity firm with stakes in everything from real estate to healthcare to municipal infrastructure. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 museums and a children's hospital, attending galas the way other people attended church. Sophie had gone to the right schools, interned at the right firms, and learned early that wealth wasn't just about money, it was about access, about knowing which doors to knock on and having them open before your knuckles touched wood. But somewhere along the way, she'd started to feel like a passenger in her own life. She'd taken the job at her father's firm because it was expected. She'd moved into the penthouse because it was available. She'd bought the BMW because her mother said the Tesla was trying too hard. And she'd driven out to that meeting last night because her father had asked, and saying no to Alexander Bennett wasn't something people did. The meeting had been a waste of time, some municipal contract negotiation that didn't need her there. But she'd gone anyway, and on the way back, her perfect, expensive car had died on the worst stretch of road in the city. And then a man with a toolbox had walked out of the rain. Now sitting at her desk in the glass-walled office her father had given her, 20th floor, corner view, her name on the door in letters that felt like a lie, Sophie opened her laptop and started searching. Ethan Cole. It took less than 10 minutes to find him. Public records, credit reports, court filings, employment history, the digital footprint of a man who'd never had the luxury of privacy. What she found made her stomach turn. Medical debt, $47,000. From a hospital stay 18 months ago, pediatric pneumonia. Patient name, Mia Cole, age 9. Eviction proceedings, filed 6 weeks ago by Grafton Properties. Wage garnishment, active. Creditor, MedCredit Solutions. Employment, Murphy's Auto Repair. Last known status, active. She clicked on MedCredit Solutions. Followed the corporate chain. 3 layers deep, she found it. A subsidiary of Archer Financial, which was owned by a holding company called Whitmore Group, which had been acquired 4 years ago by Bennett Capital, her father's firm. Sophie sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. The man who'd fixed her car, who'd refused her money and taken a croissant for his daughter, was being crushed by debt held by a company her family owned. She didn't know what to feel. Anger, guilt, disgust, all of it maybe. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. Rachel, I need you to pull a file for me. Sure, which one? Anything we have on MedCredit Solutions. And I need a meeting with whoever handles their asset management. When? Today. There was a pause. Sophie, are you? Today, Rachel. Okay, I'll set it up. Sophie hung up and looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there, Ethan Cole was probably waking up in a cold apartment, trying to figure out how to feed his daughter and keep a roof over her head. And she was sitting in a tower made of glass and money, benefiting from the system that was destroying him. Not anymore. Mug. Ethan woke up to Mia standing beside the couch, holding the croissant. Where'd this come from? He sat up, rubbing his face. I picked it up last night. You went out? Just a job, quick one. She looked at the croissant, then at him. Can I eat it? That's why I brought it home. She smiled, an actual smile, and it was the best thing he'd seen all week. Thanks, Dad. Yeah, baby. She went back to the kitchen, and Ethan stood up, his back aching, his hands still sore from the cold. He checked his phone. No messages. No missed calls. Murphy hadn't texted about the schedule, which probably meant there wasn't one. 2 weeks. He needed a plan. He needed options. He needed something other than hope, because hope wasn't paying the rent. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it for a second, then answered. Yeah? Mr. Cole? This is Rachel Nguyen. I'm calling on behalf of Sophie Bennett. Ethan frowned. Who? The woman whose car you helped last night. He sat down. Okay. Ms. Bennett would like to meet with you. Today, if possible. Why? She didn't say, but she asked me to tell you it's important. Ethan looked toward the kitchen, where Mia was eating her croissant at the table, her legs swinging under the chair. I don't have a car, he said. We'll send one. What's your address? He gave it to her, still not sure what was happening. Someone will be there in an hour, Rachel said. Thank you, Mr. Cole. She hung up. Ethan sat there, phone in his hand, trying to process. The woman from last night wanted to see him. He didn't know why, but he also didn't have anything left to lose. A talk. The car that pulled up an hour later wasn't a BMW. It was a black sedan, clean and quiet, with a driver in a suit who didn't say much beyond, Mr. Cole? Ethan nodded, climbed in, and spent the next 20 minutes watching the city change outside the window. The buildings got taller, the streets got cleaner, the people got shinier. They pulled up in front of a tower made of steel and glass, the kind of building that didn't have a lobby. It had a reception experience. The driver opened his door. 20th floor, Ms. Bennett is expecting you. Ethan got out, toolbox in hand, and walked inside. The elevator didn't have buttons, just a panel that scanned a card the receptionist gave him. He rode up in silence, watching the numbers climb, and tried not to think about how much the air in here probably cost. The doors opened. Sophie Bennett was standing there, waiting. She looked different in daylight, more tired, more real. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. You paid for the ride, figured I owed you a conversation. She almost smiled. Come with me. She led him down a hallway lined with glass-walled offices, past assistants and executives who didn't look up, and into a conference room with a view that made Ethan's stomach drop. Sit, she said. He sat. She sat across from him, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I want to be direct with you, she said. Last night you helped me. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't want money. You just wanted food for your daughter. Ethan said nothing. That stayed with me, Sophie continued, so I looked you up. His jaw tightened. You did what? I needed to understand. And what I found... She paused. What I found was unacceptable.
Lady, I don't know what you think you found, but you're drowning in medical debt. You're about to be evicted. Your wages are being garnished by a debt collector that my family's company owns. Ethan stared at her. I'm not here to apologize, Sophie said. Apologies don't fix anything. I'm here because I want to do something about it. Like what? Like clearing your debt. All of it. He laughed. Actually laughed. You're joking. I'm not. Why would you do that? Because I can. And because it's the right thing to do. Ethan stood up. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's accountability. I don't care what you call it. I'm not taking your money. Then what do you want, Mr. Cole? He looked at her. At this woman in her expensive suit, in her expensive office, in her expensive world, asking him what he wanted like it was a simple question. I want to keep my job, he said quietly. I want to feed my daughter. I want to stop feeling like I'm drowning every single day. But I don't want a handout. I want to earn it. Sophie leaned back in her chair, studying him. Okay, she said. Then let's talk about what that looks like. Sophie didn't break eye contact. Earning it means different things to different people, Mr. Cole, so tell me what it means to you. Ethan set his toolbox down on the polished conference table, the sound too loud in the quiet room. It means I show up. I do the work. I don't owe anybody anything I didn't agree to in the first place. You agreed to the medical bills? I agreed to keep my daughter alive. The bills came with it. Sophie's expression shifted slightly, something softer moving behind her eyes. That's not the same thing. Feels the same when they're garnishing your paycheck. She stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below.
For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan could hear the hum of the building around them, the distant sound of phones ringing, people moving through hallways with purpose he couldn't imagine having anymore. My father built this company on a very simple principle, Sophie said finally, her back still to him. Profit isn't personal. It's just numbers on a page. You buy debt for 30 cents on the dollar, you collect what you can, you move on. The people behind those numbers aren't real to him. They're just assets, liabilities, line items. Sounds about right. She turned. I used to think that was just how business worked. That it wasn't cruel. It was just efficient. But last night, standing on that road, watching you refuse money because all you wanted was food for your kid, she stopped. It made me realize I've been living in a system I don't actually believe in. Ethan crossed his arms. So what? You want to save me? Make yourself feel better? No. I want to do something that actually matters, and I think you can help me figure out what that looks like. I'm a mechanic. I fix cars. I don't know anything about your world. Exactly. Sophie moved back to the table, leaning against it. Everyone around me thinks the same way, talks the same way, solves problems the same way. I need someone who sees things differently, someone who understands what it's like when the system doesn't work. Ethan stared at her. You're serious? Completely. And what exactly are you asking me to do? Sophie pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for him to do the same. He did, reluctantly. I'm starting something new, she said, a project outside my father's company. It's focused on rebuilding systems that are broken, housing, healthcare access, workforce development. But I don't want it to be another charity that throws money at problems and calls it solved. I want it to actually work. And for that, I need people who've lived through the failures. You want me to what? Consult? I want you to build it with me. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, I'm about to lose my job. I can barely keep my lights on. You think I have time to help you build some project? That's exactly why I need you. You know what it's like to be 2 weeks away from losing everything. Most people in this building have never been closer than 100 miles to that feeling. She leaned forward. I'll clear your debt. All of it. I'll make sure your eviction gets dropped. I'll talk to your boss, see if we can keep you employed while we figure out the next steps. But in exchange, I need your time, your perspective, your honesty. Why me? Because you walked away from $300 and took a croissant instead. That tells me you've got something most people in my life don't have. What's that? Priorities that make sense. Ethan sat back, his mind racing. This woman, this stranger, was offering him a way out. Not a handout, but something else. Something that felt almost too good to be real, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? He asked. No catch, just work, real work. And probably a lot of arguments because I'm guessing you won't agree with half of what I say. You got that right. Sophie almost smiled. So is that a yes? Ethan thought about Mia, about the eviction notice, about Murphy's face when he'd said he had to let him go, about the croissant sitting in his fridge that his daughter had eaten like it was a feast. If I say yes, I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't know how to talk like you people. I don't know how to act in rooms like this. Good. I don't want you to. And if this thing you're building turns out to be just another rich person's guilt project, I'm out. Fair. He looked at her, really looked at her, trying to see past the expensive clothes and the family name and the office with the view, trying to see if there was something real underneath. All right, he said. I'll try it. But I'm not making any promises. Sophie extended her hand. Neither am I. They shook. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, the ground under his feet wasn't about to give out. Tiety. The first thing Sophie did was make a phone call. Ethan sat in the conference room, staring out at the city, while she stepped into the hallway and dialed a number from memory. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but he could see her through the glass wall, pacing, gesturing, her expression tight with focus. When she came back in, she looked like she'd just fought a small war. Your eviction, she said. It's handled. What does that mean? It means Grafton Properties is withdrawing the filing. You've got 6 months of rent covered while we figure out a longer-term solution. Ethan blinked. Just like that? Just like that. How? Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Sophie sighed, sitting down across from him again. Grafton Properties is owned by a real estate group that has financing through one of our partner firms. I called in a favor, told them the situation. They agreed to pull back. A favor? Yes. So I'm still just someone's charity case. No, you're someone who got screwed by a system that shouldn't exist in the first place. I'm not fixing your life out of pity, Mr. Cole. I'm fixing a problem that never should have been yours to carry. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sophie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at him. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, but I want you to come back tomorrow, 9 a.m. We'll start mapping out what this project actually looks like. I've got work. I thought you said, I've got 2 weeks left. I'm not going to just stop showing up. She nodded slowly. All right, then come after. 6 p.m. We'll work evenings until we figure out the transition. Ethan stood, picking up his toolbox. You're really doing this. We're really doing this. He walked to the door, then stopped. Why didn't you just pay me last night? Would have been easier. Sophie looked at him, and for the first time he saw something raw in her expression, something that looked almost like shame. Because I've spent my whole life throwing money at things and calling it help, she said quietly, and I'm tired of pretending that's the same as actually giving a damn. Ethan nodded once, then left. Marquette. The car dropped him off 3 blocks from the apartment. He told the driver he'd walk the rest of the way. Didn't need the neighbors seeing him climb out of a car like that. Questions he didn't want to answer. Mia was home when he got there, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up when he walked in. Where were you? Had a meeting. A meeting? Yeah. For what? Ethan set his toolbox down and sat across from her. Something new, might turn into a job. Her eyes went wide. Really? Maybe. Don't get excited yet. But she was already smiling, and he realized how long it had been since he'd seen her look hopeful about anything. What kind of job? Honestly, I'm not totally sure yet, but it's different. Different from the shop. Different good or different bad? Don't know yet, baby. We'll find out. She went back to her homework, and Ethan stood, moving to the fridge. There wasn't much in there, but there was enough for tonight. He'd figure out tomorrow when it came. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Sophie. I forgot to get your email. Can you send it to this number? Also, thank you for today. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Don't have an email, and you don't need to thank me. I didn't do anything yet. Her response came fast. You showed up. That's more than most people do. He didn't reply. Just set the phone down and started making dinner. The next 2 weeks were a blur. Ethan spent his days at Murphy's, working through his final jobs, saying quiet goodbyes to the regulars who'd been coming to the shop for years. Murphy didn't say much, but on Ethan's last day he pulled him aside and handed him an envelope. What's this? Severance. It's not much, but you don't have to. Take it, Ethan. You've been good to this place. It's the least I can do. Ethan took the envelope, shook Murphy's hand, and walked out of the shop for the last time. That night, he went to Sophie's office. She was waiting for him in the same conference room, but this time the table was covered in papers, charts, spreadsheets, printed articles, handwritten notes. You've been busy, Ethan said, setting his toolbox down. I've been thinking, Sophie gestured to the mess. This is everything I've pulled together so far. Data on housing instability, medical debt, wage stagnation, workforce gaps. It's all connected, but I can't figure out where to start. Ethan walked over, scanning the papers. Numbers and graphs that didn't mean much to him, but he got the shape of it. People falling through cracks, systems that didn't catch them. You're trying to fix everything at once, he said. I know, that's the problem. So don't. Pick one thing, fix it, then move to the next. Sophie looked at him. Which one? Ethan thought about it. About the eviction notice. About Mia's hospital bills. About the bus rides and the cold apartment and the nights he'd lain awake doing math that never added up. Housing, he said. You can't fix anything else if people don't have a place to live. Sophie nodded slowly. Okay, housing. What does that look like? I don't know. You're the one with the money, but you're the one who knows what actually works. They spent the next 3 hours going back and forth. Sophie throwing out ideas, subsidized units, rent assistance programs, partnerships with developers. Ethan pushing back on half of it, pointing out where the gaps were, where people would fall through, where the system would fail the same way it always did. You can't just give people cheaper rent, he said at one point. You've got to make sure they can keep it. That means jobs, stability, childcare. It's not just one thing. So we build all of it. With what? With this. Sophie gestured at the papers. With funding, with partnerships, with people who actually know what they're doing. People like me. People exactly like you. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhausted. You know this is going to take years, right? Maybe decades. You can't just snap your fingers and fix poverty. I know. And most people are going to think you're crazy. I know that too. So why do it? Sophie was quiet for a moment, staring at the table. Then she looked up at him. Because I don't want to be the kind of person who sees a problem and does nothing. I've been that person my whole life. I'm done with it. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They worked until midnight. By the time Ethan left, they had the skeleton of a plan. Not a complete one. Not even a good one, probably. But it was something. And something was more than he'd had 2 weeks ago. Sophie's father found out 3 days later. Ethan wasn't there when it happened, but Sophie told him about it later, her voice tight with anger she was barely keeping under control. He called me into his office, wanted to know why I was interfering with MedCredit's collections, why I'd pulled strings on a Grafton eviction, why I was, and I quote, wasting time on pet projects instead of focusing on the firm. They were sitting in a coffee shop this time, a neutral space away from the glass tower and the weight of her family's name. Ethan sipped his coffee, black, the way he'd always taken it, and listened. What did you tell him? I told him it wasn't a pet project, that I was starting something real, something that mattered. How'd he take it? Sophie laughed bitterly. About as well as you'd expect. He said I was being naive, that I didn't understand how the world worked, that if I wanted to help people, I should just write a check to a charity and move on. Sounds like a real warm guy. He's not warm, he's practical. And in his world, what we're doing doesn't make sense. Does it make sense in yours? Sophie looked at him. Yeah, it does. Ethan set his cup down. So what happens now? Now I keep going, with or without his approval. That's going to cost you. I know. I mean really cost you. Family stuff, money stuff, all of it. I know, Sophie said again, and this time her voice was steady. But I've spent my whole life living in a world I didn't build, following rules I didn't write, pretending it was all fine. I'm not doing that anymore. Ethan studied her. This woman who'd grown up with everything he'd never had, now willing to risk it because she'd seen something on a roadside that didn't sit right with her. You're tougher than you look, he said. I'm learning. The project started to take shape. Sophie pulled together a small team, people she trusted, people who believed in what they were building. A lawyer named David Chen, who specialized in housing policy. A social worker named Karen Okafor, who'd spent 15 years in community outreach. A finance guy named Marcus Webb, who knew how to make budgets stretch further than they had any right to. And Ethan, he wasn't sure what his title was supposed to be. Sophie called him a consultant. Marcus called him a reality check. Karen just called him Ethan, which he appreciated. They met twice a week at first, then 3 times, then almost every day, mapping out a plan that felt impossible and necessary in equal measure. They weren't just talking about housing anymore. They were talking about job training programs, childcare co-ops, healthcare navigation, all the things that people needed to stop drowning and start swimming. Ethan brought Mia to one of the meetings, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't have anyone to watch her that night, and Sophie had said it was fine. Mia sat in the corner with her homework while the adults talked, and at one point, Karen looked over at her and smiled. How old is she? 9, Ethan said. She's good, quiet, focused. Yeah, she's had to be. Karen's expression softened, and Ethan knew she understood what he wasn't saying. That Mia had learned early how to be small, how to not be a burden, how to make herself invisible when the adults were stressed. After the meeting, Sophie walked them out. She's wonderful, Sophie said, watching Mia skip ahead toward the elevator.
She's the reason I'm still standing.
I can tell. They stood there for a moment, and Ethan realized something had shifted between them.
They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't even just colleagues. They were something else, partners maybe. People building something together that neither of them could build alone. Thank you, Sophie said quietly, for taking a chance on this. You're the one who took the chance? I'm just along for the ride.
No, you're the one making it real. All of this, it was just ideas before. You're the one who's turning it into something that might actually work. Ethan shrugged. We'll see. Mia called the elevator, and the doors opened. Ethan stepped inside, then looked back at Sophie. Same time Thursday? Same time. The doors closed, and Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. 3 months in, they hit their first real obstacle. The building they'd found, an old factory space on the east side, perfect for converting into mixed-use housing and a training center, fell through. The owner had sold it to a developer who wanted to turn it into luxury condos. Sophie was furious. Ethan had never seen her like that, pacing the conference room, her voice sharp with frustration. We had an agreement. We had terms. He gave us his word. His word doesn't mean much when someone else offers more money, Marcus said quietly. So what do? We find another building. There isn't another building, not like that one, not in that neighborhood. Ethan had been quiet through most of the meeting, but now he spoke up. So we build different. Everyone looked at him. What do you mean? Sophie asked. Sophie needs. I mean, maybe we don't need one big building. Maybe we start smaller, a couple of houses, a single block, something we can actually control. David leaned forward. That could work. Small-scale pilot program, proof of concept. It's not what we planned, Sophie said. Plans change, Ethan said. Doesn't mean we quit. Sophie looked at him, and slowly, the anger in her expression shifted into something else. Determination. All right, we start smaller, but we start. Charmed. By the time winter hit, they'd secured 3 properties. Small houses in a neighborhood that had seen better days, but still had people who cared about it. They weren't much. Peeling paint, sagging porches, roofs that needed work. But they were theirs. Ethan spent his weekends doing repairs. Sophie showed up in jeans and work boots, insisting on helping even though she didn't know the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead. Marcus handled the budgets. David navigated the permits and zoning laws. Karen started recruiting families. It was slow. It was hard. It was nothing like what any of them had imagined, but it was real. One Saturday, Ethan was on a roof, replacing shingles, when Sophie climbed up the ladder and sat down beside him. You're not supposed to be up here, Sarah, he said. Neither are you. You're a consultant, remember? Consultant who knows how to fix a roof. They sat in silence for a moment, looking out over the neighborhood. The city stretched beyond it, tall and cold and indifferent. You ever think about what happens if this doesn't work? Sophie asked. Every day? And I figure we'll deal with it if it happens. But right now we're still moving forward. That's got to count for something. Sophie nodded. My father asked me yesterday when I was going to stop playing and come back to the real world. What'd you say? I told him this is the real world. His is the one that's make-believe. Ethan smiled. Bet that went over well. He hung up on me. Sorry. Don't be. It felt good. They sat there a while longer, the wind cold against their faces, the city below them unaware and uncaring. But up here, on this roof, fixing this house, building this thing that might fail but might not, it felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. And for the first time in longer than Ethan could remember, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The first family moved in on a Tuesday in February. Ethan was there when they arrived. A woman named Lisa Torres and her 2 sons, ages 6 and 8. She stood on the front porch of the house they'd just finished renovating, staring at the door like she couldn't believe it was real. You okay? Ethan asked. Lisa turned to him and there were tears running down her face. We've been in a shelter for 9 months. Before that, my car. Before that, she stopped, wiping her eyes. I just never thought we'd have a place again. Ethan handed her the keys. It's yours now. 6 months guaranteed, rent-free. After that, we'll figure out what comes next based on where you're at. Why are you doing this? Because someone did something for me when I needed it. This is me paying it forward. Lisa's younger son tugged on her sleeve. Mom, can we go inside? She laughed, a sound caught between crying and relief, and unlocked the door. Ethan watched them disappear into the house, heard the boys' voices echoing through the empty rooms, and felt something tighten in his chest. This was what it was supposed to feel like. Not the meetings or the budgets or the planning sessions. This. A family walking into a home. Sophie pulled up a few minutes later, parking her car on the street and climbing out with a box of cleaning supplies and groceries. They here? She asked. Just went in. Good. She started toward the house, then stopped. You coming? Yeah, just give me a second. She looked at him, understanding without him having to explain. Then she nodded and went inside. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, and let himself feel it. The weight of what they'd built. The impossibility of it. 3 houses, 3 families. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was everything to the people living in them. He thought about Mia, about the apartment they still lived in, about how close they'd come to losing it. And he thought about the night on Route 17 when he'd met a stranger with a broken car and no idea that saying yes to her would lead here. His phone buzzed. A text from Karen. Second family ready for Friday. Can you meet them Thursday to walk through the house? He typed back. Yeah. What time? 4 p.m. Thanks, Ethan. He pocketed the phone and walked inside. The project grew faster than any of them expected. By spring, they had 10 houses. By summer, 15. Word spread through the neighborhood, then through the city. People started calling, asking if it was real, if there was space, if they qualified. Karen's phone rang constantly. David spent half his time navigating new zoning approvals and permit applications. Marcus worked miracles with the budget, stretching every dollar until it screamed. And Ethan became the person people trusted. He didn't know when it happened exactly. Somewhere between the first repair job and the 10th house and the endless conversations with families who just needed someone to listen, he'd become the face of the thing. The person who showed up when the heat broke or the sink leaked or someone just needed to know that the people running this actually gave a damn. Sophie noticed. Sophie, you're good at this, she said one night. They were in the office late, going over applications for the next round of housing placements. Good at what? Talking to people. Making them feel like they matter. Ethan shrugged. I just treat them like human beings. It's not complicated. You'd be surprised how rare that is. He looked up from the stack of papers in front of him. You do the same thing. No, I write checks and make phone calls. You actually connect with people. It's different. Maybe, but we need both. Sophie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She'd been distant lately, distracted. Ethan had noticed, but hadn't pushed. Figured she'd talk when she was ready. You all right? He asked now. Yeah, just tired. You're always tired. So are you. Yeah, but I'm used to it. You're not. She set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. My father's trying to shut us down. Ethan went still. What? He can't do it directly, but he's putting pressure on our funding sources, calling in favors, making it harder for us to get loans, partnerships, donations. He's trying to choke us out. Why? Because he thinks I'm wasting my potential. Because he doesn't like that I'm doing something he can't control. Take your pick. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. That's bullshit. I know. So what do? We keep going. We find other funding. We work harder. We don't let him win. You make it sound easy. It's not. But quitting isn't an option. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the toll this was taking, the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was carrying something too heavy to put down. You don't have to do this alone, he said. I'm not alone. I have you. I have the team. I mean your family stuff. You don't have to fight that battle by yourself. Sophie's expression softened. I appreciate that, but this one's mine. Yeah, well, if you change your mind, I've got a pretty good right hook. She laughed, and it was real this time. I'll keep that in mind. Matt. Alexander Bennett showed up unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan was at one of the houses installing a new water heater when the black Mercedes pulled up outside. He didn't recognize the car, but he recognized the type. Expensive, immaculate, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in this neighborhood. A man in his 60s stepped out, tall and sharp-edged in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's truck used to. He looked at the house with the expression of someone inspecting a crime scene. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked outside. "Help you?" The man turned. "You're Ethan Cole." It wasn't a question. "That's me. Alexander Bennett, Sophie's father." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I figured. I'd like to speak with you. I'm working. This won't take long." Ethan considered telling him to leave. Considered a lot of things, actually, but curiosity won out. He wanted to see what kind of man could look at what his daughter was building and try to tear it down. "All right, talk." Alexander glanced at the house, then back at Ethan. "My daughter has gotten herself involved in something that's going to fail. I assume you're aware of that." "Funny, it's not failing yet." "Yet. But it will. These projects always do. Good intentions aren't enough to sustain an operation like this. You need infrastructure, systems, experience, none of which you have. We're learning. You're gambling with my daughter's future, with your own credibility, and with the lives of the people you're pretending to help." Ethan crossed his arms. "We're not pretending, we're actually doing it. For now. But what happens when the money runs out? When the reality of maintaining 15 houses and supporting 15 families becomes unsustainable? What happens to those people then?" "We'll figure it out." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Alexander stepped closer, and Ethan could see the calculation in his eyes. This was a man used to winning arguments, used to people backing down. "Mr. Cole, I'm not here to be cruel. I'm here because I'm concerned about my daughter. She's risking everything for a project that has no long-term viability, and I believe you're encouraging her to do it." "She doesn't need encouragement. She's doing this because she wants to. She's doing this because she feels guilty. Guilty about the wealth she was born into, guilty about the system she benefits from. And you're feeding that guilt instead of helping her see reason." Ethan felt his temper rising, but he kept his voice level. "You know what I see when I look at your daughter? I see someone who actually gives a damn about people. Someone who's willing to put in the work instead of just writing a check and walking away. That's not guilt. That's character. Character doesn't pay the bills. No, but it builds things that last longer than your bottom line." Alexander studied him for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "When this falls apart, and it will, call me. I'll make sure you land on your feet. You seem like a capable man. You could do well in the right environment." Ethan didn't take the card. "I'm already in the right environment." Alexander's expression didn't change. He slipped the card back into his pocket, nodded once, and walked back to his car. Ethan watched him drive away, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline he was working hard to keep contained. Sophie called 10 minutes later. "My father just left your site." "Yeah, I met him." "What did he say?" "That we're going to fail, that I'm a bad influence, that you're wasting your life." There was silence on the other end. Then, "I'm sorry. I didn't know he was going there." "Don't apologize. It's not your fault your dad's an asshole." Sophie laughed, but it sounded tired. "No, but it is my problem." "Then let's make it our problem. We're in this together, right?" "Right." "Good. Now stop worrying about him and help me figure out why this water heater keeps making a weird noise." Bolt. The trouble started in June. One of their funding sources pulled out. A private donor who'd committed $50,000 suddenly decided the project was too risky. Then another donor followed. Then a bank that had been processing a small business loan for their training program rejected the application without explanation. Marcus came to the next team meeting looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We've got a problem," he said, spreading spreadsheets across the table. "We're short. Way short. If we don't find replacement funding in the next 60 days, we're going to have to cut services. Maybe even give up some of the houses." "How short?" Sophie asked. 120,000. The room went quiet. David spoke first. "Can we get a bridge loan?" "I've tried. Every bank I've talked to suddenly has concerns about our model." "Let me guess," Ethan said. "They all have connections to Bennett Capital." Marcus looked at him. "I can't prove it, but yeah, that's what it feels like." Sophie stood up and walked to the window. her back to the room. No one said anything for a long moment. "We'll figure it out," she said finally. "How?" Karen asked gently. "I don't know yet, but we will." After the meeting, Ethan found Sophie in the hallway. She was leaning against the wall, eyes closed, looking more defeated than he'd ever seen her. "Hey," she opened her eyes. "Hey, you okay?" "No, but I will be. Your dad's behind this." "I know. So what do we do?" Sophie pushed off the wall and looked at him. "We fight. We find new donors. We cut costs where we can. We figure out how to do more with less. We don't quit." "You sound sure." "I have to be, because if I'm not, then he wins, and I'm not letting him win." Ethan nodded. "All right, then let's get to work." They spent the next month scrambling. Sophie reached out to everyone she knew, everyone who'd ever expressed interest in what they were building. She gave presentations to community groups, pitched to foundations, wrote grant applications until her hands cramped. Ethan started teaching basic repair workshops, charging a small fee that went back into the project. Karen organized fundraising events. David negotiated with suppliers for discounts. It wasn't enough. By mid-July, they were still 40,000 short. And the families in their houses were starting to notice the strain. Repairs were taking longer. Support services were getting stretched thin. The thing they'd built was starting to crack. One night, sitting in the office alone, Sophie pulled up her phone and stared at her father's number. One call. That's all it would take. One call, and he'd write the check. He'd save the project. All she'd have to do was admit he was right, admit that she couldn't do this without him. Her finger hovered over the screen, then she set the phone down and called Ethan instead. "You busy? Just got Mia to bed. What's up?" "I need to talk." "Okay, talk." "Not on the phone. Can you meet me?" There was a pause. "Yeah, where?" "The first house, the one we gave to Lisa." "I'll be there in 20 org." Sophie was sitting on the front steps when Ethan arrived. The street was quiet, the house dark behind her. He sat down beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke. "I almost called him," Sophie said finally. "Your dad?" "Yeah." "But you didn't." "No, but I wanted to, and that scares me." "Why?" "Because it means he's winning. He's making this so hard that I'm starting to think he's right, that maybe I can't do this, that maybe I'm just fooling myself." Ethan leaned back, looking up at the sky. "You know what I was doing a year ago?" "What?" "Trying to figure out how to explain to my 9-year-old daughter why we were about to be homeless. I was 2 weeks away from losing my job, 2 months behind on rent, and so buried in debt I couldn't see daylight. And then you showed up." Sophie looked at him. "You didn't fix everything," Ethan continued. "You didn't wave a magic wand and make it all perfect. But you gave me something I didn't have before, a chance. And now, because of that, I'm sitting here with you, trying to figure out how to give other people the same thing." "We're failing, Ethan." "No, we're struggling. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah, failing is when you quit. Struggling is when you keep going even though it's hard." He turned to her. "You think Lisa Torres cares that we're 40,000 short? You think her kids care? They've got a home. They've got stability. They've got a future they didn't have before. That's not failure." Sophie's eyes were wet. "What if we lose it all?" "Then we lose it. But we don't lose it without fighting first." She wiped her eyes, nodding. "Okay. Okay." They sat there a while longer, the night settling around them, the weight of what they'd built pressing down but not breaking them. Not yet. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Karen had a friend who worked for a nonprofit foundation focused on housing innovation. She'd mentioned their project in passing, not expecting much, but the friend passed it along to her director. 2 weeks later, Sophie got a call. The Riverside Foundation wanted to meet. They flew out a team, 3 people who spent 2 days touring the houses, talking to families, reviewing budgets, asking questions that actually made sense. They didn't make promises, but they didn't shut it down either. On the 3rd day, the director, a woman named Helen Park, sat down with Sophie, Ethan, and Marcus in the office. "I'll be direct," Helen said. "We're interested. What you're doing here is exactly the kind of work we want to support. It's small scale, community focused, and it's actually working." Sophie felt her heart pounding. What does that mean? It means we're prepared to offer you a grant, $60,000, unrestricted funds. And if this pilot phase continues to show results, we'll consider a larger partnership next year. Marcus let out a breath. Sophie looked like she might cry. Ethan just nodded slowly, letting it sink in. There's one condition, Helen continued. We need to see a sustainability plan, something that shows us this isn't dependent on one-time grants or individual donors. You need a model that can grow. We can do that, Sophie said immediately. Good. I'll have our team send over the paperwork. Congratulations. Helen stood, shaking hands with each of them. You're doing something special here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. After she left, the three of them sat in silence. Then Marcus started laughing. We did it, he said. We actually did it. Sophie covered her face with her hands, and Ethan couldn't tell if she was laughing or crying, maybe both. We're not done yet, Ethan said. We've still got a lot of work to do. I know, Sophie said, lowering her hands. Her eyes were red but clear. But we've got a chance now. A real chance. Yeah, we do. Guts. That night, Ethan picked Mia up from her after-school program and took her out for pizza. Why are we celebrating? She asked, looking at the extra-large pie he'd ordered. Because sometimes things work out, he said. Did you get a raise? Not exactly, but something good happened at work. Mia grinned. Does that mean we can get dessert too? Yeah, baby, we can get dessert. They ate until they were too full to move, and on the way home, Mia fell asleep in the bus seat beside him, her head on his shoulder. Ethan looked down at her and felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the absence of problems, not the end of struggle, just peace. The knowledge that they were going to be okay, that he'd found something worth fighting for, and people worth fighting alongside. When they got home, he carried Mia to bed, kissed her forehead, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't really want. His phone buzzed, a text from Sophie. Thank you, for tonight, for everything. For not letting me quit. He typed back. We're partners, that's what partners do. Still, thank you. He smiled and set the phone down. Outside, the city moved through its restless night. But inside this small apartment, in this moment, everything was still. And for now, that was enough. The Riverside Foundation grant changed everything, but not in the ways Ethan expected. The money solved their immediate crisis, but it also brought scrutiny. Helen Park wasn't the type to write a check and walk away. She wanted reports. Data. Metrics proving the project was sustainable and scalable. Every 2 weeks, Sophie sat in video calls explaining their progress, defending their decisions, justifying every dollar spent. Ethan watched her handle it with a grace he didn't think he could manage. She'd learned to speak 2 languages now, the language of people like Lisa Torres, who just needed someone to listen, and the language of foundations and investors, who needed numbers and projections and 5-year plans. He wasn't sure which one exhausted her more. By September, they'd expanded to 22 houses and launched the training program Ethan had been pushing for since the beginning. Basic skills, plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. Things people could use to find jobs or start small businesses. Things Ethan actually knew how to teach. The first class had 8 students. All of them were parents living in their houses, trying to build something stable for their kids. Ethan stood in front of them in the converted community space they'd set up in one of the larger properties, holding a wrench and feeling more nervous than he'd felt in months. All right, he said, I'm not a teacher. I'm just a guy who's been fixing things for a long time. So if I'm doing this wrong, somebody tell me. A man in the front row, Carlos, mid-30s, 2 kids, raised his hand. Yeah, Ethan said. You're doing fine. Just show us what to do. Ethan nodded and got to work. He taught them how to fix a leaking pipe, how to replace an electrical outlet, how to patch drywall. Simple stuff, but stuff that mattered. Stuff that could save you $100 when money was tight. Stuff that could get you hired if you knew how to talk about it right. After class, Carlos stayed behind. Hey man, I just wanted to say thanks. For what? For treating us like we're capable of learning this. Most programs, they talk down to you, like you're broken and they're fixing you. You're not doing that. Ethan set down his toolbox. You're not broken, you're just dealing with a system that's rigged against you. Learning how to fix a sink doesn't change that, but it gives you one more tool to fight back with. Carlos smiled. Yeah, exactly. After he left, Ethan sat in the empty room for a while, thinking about what he'd just done. He'd spent most of his life feeling like he wasn't good enough, smart enough, successful enough, and now he was teaching other people skills that could change their lives. It felt strange, but it also felt right. Sophie's relationship with her father deteriorated completely in October. It started with a voicemail. Alexander's voice, cold and clipped, informing her that he was removing her from the succession plan for Bennett Capital. She would still receive her trust fund distributions, but she would no longer have any operational role in the company, effective immediately. Sophie listened to the message 3 times, sitting in her car outside one of the houses, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. She didn't cry. She just stared at the dashboard and felt something inside her snap. When Ethan found her an hour later, she was still sitting there. He knocked on the window. She unlocked the door, and he slid into the passenger seat. "You okay?" "He cut me out," she said, her voice flat. "Officially. Permanently." "I'm sorry." "I'm not." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were hard. "I thought I'd feel something. Sad, maybe, or angry. But I just feel free." "Free?" "Yeah. Because now I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to keep one foot in his world and one foot in this one. I'm all in, whether I want to be or not." Ethan studied her face. "You sure about that?" "No. But I don't have a choice now, do I?" "There's always a choice." Sophie laughed, bitter and sharp. "Not for me. Not anymore. I burned that bridge, and he's the one holding the match." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ethan said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're scared, and I think you're trying to convince yourself you're not." Sophie's expression cracked, just slightly. "Of course I'm scared. I just gave up everything I was supposed to be. My family, my inheritance, my entire future. For what? A project that might fail? A vision that most people think is naive? For people who need it. For something real. And what if it's not enough? Then it's not enough. But at least you tried." Sophie looked at him, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes, fear and determination fighting for control. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be the person who walks away from everything." "Yeah, you do. You've been doing it for months." "It was easier when I thought I could still go back." "You never wanted to go back. You just wanted the safety net." She closed her eyes. "Yeah. Well, the net's gone now, so all that's left is forward." Sophie opened her eyes and nodded slowly. "Forward. Forward." The crisis came in November, and it came fast. One of their houses caught fire. Electrical problem, old wiring that Ethan had flagged for replacement but hadn't gotten to yet. No one was hurt, but the house was gutted. The family living there, a single mother named Jasmine with 3 kids, lost everything. Ethan was the first one on the scene. He stood in front of the smoking wreckage, staring at the charred skeleton of what used to be a home, and felt guilt crash over him like a wave. He should have fixed it sooner, should have prioritized it, should have done something. Sophie arrived 30 minutes later, pulling up in her car and climbing out with an expression Ethan couldn't read. "Is everyone okay?" she asked. "Yeah, they got out in time." "Where are they now?" "Red Cross put them in a hotel for the night, but after that..." Ethan shook his head. "I don't know." Sophie walked closer to the house, her shoes crunching on debris. "What happened?" "Electrical fire, the wiring was shot. I knew it was bad, but I didn't think..." He stopped. "I screwed up." "No, the system screwed up. We've been stretched too thin, trying to do too much with too little. This isn't on you. I'm the one who was supposed to fix it. And I'm the one who pushed us to take on more houses before we were ready. If you're taking blame, I'm taking it with you." Ethan looked at her, and he could see the same guilt in her face that he felt in his chest. "We need to do better," he said. "I know. We can't let this happen again." "I know." They stood there in silence, watching the fire department pack up their equipment, the house behind them a monument to everything that could go wrong. Enoch. Jasmine and her kids moved into a temporary unit they scrambled to secure, but the damage was done in more ways than one. Word of the fire spread through the community, and suddenly people were asking questions. Was the project safe? Were the houses up to code? Who was responsible when things went wrong? Helen Park called 2 days later. "We need to talk about the fire," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Sophie sat in the office, staring at her laptop screen, feeling her stomach drop. "It was an accident. Old wiring. We're addressing it. I understand, but our board has concerns. They're asking whether your safety protocols are adequate, whether you're moving too fast. We're doing everything we can with the resources we have." "That's not the same as doing it right, Sophie." The words hit harder than they should have. Sophie closed her eyes, forcing herself to stay calm. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need a full safety audit before we can approve the next phase of funding. And I'm saying you need to slow down. Focus on the houses you have. Make sure they're solid before you expand." "That could take months." "Better months than another fire." Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but she knew Helen was right. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll do the audit." "Good, I'll send over the details." After the call ended, Sophie sat in the dark office and let herself feel the weight of it all. The pressure, the responsibility, the knowledge that every decision she made affected real people's lives. When Ethan walked in an hour later, she was still sitting there. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks." "What happened?" She told him about the call, about the audit, about Helen's concerns. Ethan sat down across from her. "So we slow down. We can't afford to slow down. We have families waiting, people who need housing now, not 6 months from now. And we have families already in houses that need to be safe. You heard Helen. We gotta fix what we've got before we build more." "I know, Sophie stopped, rubbing her face. "I feel like we're always one step away from falling apart." "Yeah, that's pretty much how it works." "How do you deal with it?" "I don't. I just keep moving and hope I don't trip." Sophie laughed despite herself. "That's not reassuring." Wasn't trying to be reassuring, was trying to be honest. She looked at him, and something in his expression steadied her. He wasn't pretending this was easy, wasn't pretending they had all the answers. He was just here, in the mess with her, figuring it out one day at a time. "All right," she said. "We do the audit, we fix the houses, we make sure this doesn't happen again." "Yeah." "And then we keep going." "Yeah." The audit took 6 weeks and cost them $20,000 they didn't really have. The inspector found violations in 8 of their houses. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to require immediate repairs. Ethan and a small crew he'd pulled together worked 16-hour days fixing wiring, updating electrical panels, replacing outdated plumbing. Sophie spent those weeks on the phone with contractors, suppliers, and Helen Park's team, explaining every step they were taking, every dollar they were spending, every decision they were making. By December, they were exhausted, and they were stronger. The houses passed inspection. Helen Park approved the next phase of funding, and the families living in those homes knew, because Ethan and Sophie made sure they knew, that their safety mattered more than expansion, more than growth, more than any number on a spreadsheet. Lisa Torres stopped by the office one afternoon while Ethan was there. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For caring, for fixing things right. My last landlord, when something broke, he'd slap a patch on it and call it done. You guys actually care about making sure we're safe." Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. "Yeah, we do. It shows." After she left, Sophie looked at Ethan and said, "That's why we do this." "I know. Not for the foundations or the grants or the recognition, for that. For people knowing they matter." Ethan nodded. "Yeah." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sophie's phone rang. She glanced at it and frowned. "It's my mother." Ethan raised his eyebrows. "You gonna answer?" Sophie stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the button. Then she answered, "Mom." Ethan couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Sophie's face change. Surprise, confusion, something that looked almost like hope. Yeah, I can meet you." "When?" "Okay, I'll be there." She hung up and looked at Ethan. "My mother wants to have lunch. That good or bad?" "I have no idea." Sophie met her mother at a restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where the silverware cost more than most people's grocery bills. Catherine Bennett was already seated when Sophie arrived, looking immaculate in a way that had always made Sophie feel slightly inadequate. "Sophie," her mother said, standing to kiss her cheek, "you look well." "Thanks." "So do you." They sat, ordered, made small talk that felt like walking through a minefield. Then, finally, Catherine set down her water glass and looked at her daughter. "Your father told me what happened, about the succession plan." "I figured he would." "He's angry." "I know. But I'm not." Sophie looked up. "You're not?" Catherine smiled, and it was sad and complicated and real. "No, I'm actually proud of you." Sophie felt her chest tighten. "Mom, let me finish." Catherine leaned forward. "I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me. Marrying the right man, raising the right kind of daughter, sitting on the right boards and attending the right galas. And I've been miserable for most of it." Sophie didn't know what to say. "When I heard what you were doing, really doing, not just the version your father tells, I realized you're doing something I never had the courage to do. You're building something that matters, something real." "It's hard," Sophie said quietly. "Really hard." "I imagine it is, but you're doing it anyway. I don't know if I'm doing it right. No one does. That's the point." Catherine reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. "I can't help you publicly. Your father would never forgive me. But I can help you privately, and I want to." "How?" "I have resources, connections, a trust fund your father doesn't control. If you need funding, I can provide it, quietly. No strings attached." Sophie stared at her mother, feeling tears building behind her eyes. "Why?" "Because you're my daughter, and because I want you to succeed where I failed." Sophie squeezed her mother's hand. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just promise me you won't give up, no matter how hard it gets." "I won't." "Good." They finished lunch talking about the project, about the families, about Sophie's vision for the future. And when Sophie left the restaurant 2 hours later, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Support. Not from the person she expected, not in the way she expected, but real tangible support from someone who understood what she was trying to do. She called Ethan from the car. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than I thought. She's going to help us." "Your mom?" "Yeah." "Huh, didn't see that coming." "Neither did I." There was a pause. Then Ethan said, "You okay?" Sophie smiled. "Yeah, I think I am. Okay." Christmas came quietly that year. Ethan spent it with Mia in their apartment, which was warmer now, more stable, more like an actual home. They put up a small tree, nothing fancy, but Mia decorated it with an enthusiasm that made Ethan's heart hurt in the best way. "This is the best Christmas we've ever had," she said, standing back to admire their work. "Yeah?" "Yeah, because you're not worried all the time." Ethan looked at his daughter, this small person who noticed everything, and realized she was right. He wasn't worried. Not the way he used to be. There were still problems, still struggles, still nights when he lay awake wondering if they were doing enough. But the crushing weight of it was gone. "You're right," he said. "This is pretty good." "Can we invite Miss Sophie over?" Mia asked. "For Christmas?" "Yeah, I don't think she has anywhere to go." Ethan pulled out his phone and texted Sophie. "Mia wants to know if you want to come over for Christmas dinner. Nothing fancy, just us." Her response came fast. "I'd love to. What can I bring?" "Just yourself. We've got the rest covered." Sophie showed up at 6 with a bottle of wine and a bag of gifts she claimed were just small things. Mia opened them and found books, art supplies, and a new winter coat that actually fit. "You didn't have to do this," Ethan said. "I wanted to." They ate spaghetti because that's what Mia had requested, and they sat around the small table in the small apartment and talked about everything and nothing, the project, the families, the future. At one point, Mia looked at Sophie and asked, "Are you and my dad friends?" Sophie glanced at Ethan, then smiled at Mia. "Yeah, we're friends." "Good, he needs more friends," Ethan laughed. "Thanks, baby." After dinner, Mia fell asleep on the couch, and Ethan and Sophie sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and talking in low voices. "Thank you for inviting me," Sophie said. "I would have been alone tonight." "Your mom didn't..." She's with my father. Appearances matter, even at Christmas. That sucks. It's fine. This is better anyway. Ethan looked at her. You mean that? Yeah, I do. She smiled. This feels like family. The real kind. Not the obligatory kind. Yeah, it does. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the apartment warm around them, the city outside cold and distant. And Ethan realized that somewhere along the way, they'd become more than partners, more than colleagues. They'd become people who mattered to each other. And that was worth more than any grant or foundation or family fortune could ever be. The new year arrived with snow, which was rare for the city, but somehow fitting. Ethan stood outside one of the houses on New Year's morning, watching Mia and a handful of other kids from the neighborhood build a lopsided snowman in the front yard. Their laughter cut through the cold air, sharp and bright, and he found himself smiling without meaning to. Sophie walked up beside him, her breath visible in the freezing air, holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street. Thought you could use this, she said, handing him one. Thanks. He took it, wrapping his hands around the warmth. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Yeah, I know the feeling. They stood there watching the kids, neither one saying much. It had become a comfortable thing between them, the silence. They'd spent so much time talking over the past year, planning, arguing, solving problems, that sometimes just standing together was enough. I've been thinking, Sophie said finally, about what comes next. Ethan glanced at her. We've got the audit results. Helen's happy. Your mom's funding is coming through. What else is there to think about? Expansion. Real expansion. We've proven the model works on a small scale. 22 houses, 53 people housed, 18 people through the training program. But that's just a drop in the ocean. So we add more drops. Or we build something bigger. Ethan turned to face her fully. How much bigger? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed him a document she'd been working on. Plans for a full residential development. 60 units. Mixed income housing, on-site childcare, job training center, community spaces. This is what I'm proposing to the Riverside Foundation, she said. With my mother's backing and their support, we could actually build this. Not in 5 years, in 2. Ethan stared at the plans, feeling something rise in his chest that might have been excitement or terror. Maybe both. That's ambitious. Too ambitious? I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. He looked at her. I'm thinking it's a hell of a lot of work. I'm thinking it's risky. I'm thinking we could fail spectacularly. He paused. I'm also thinking we should do it. Sophie smiled, and it was the real smile, the one that made her look younger and less tired. Yeah? Yeah, but we do it right this time. No cutting corners, no rushing. We build it the way it's supposed to be built. Agreed. And we bring the families into the planning, not just as residents, as partners, people who actually have a say in what this thing becomes. Sophie nodded slowly. I like that. A lot. Good. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it different from every other development project out there. That's the point. Mia ran up to them, her face red from the cold, her coat covered in snow. Dad, come help us! The snowman's falling over! Ethan handed his coffee to Sophie and followed his daughter into the yard. Sophie watched him go, watched him crouch down with the kids and start rebuilding the snowman's base, his hands moving with the same careful precision he brought to everything. She pulled out her phone and started making notes. There was work to do, a lot of it. But for the first time since this whole thing started, she felt like they were building towards something that could actually last. Bus. The presentation to the Riverside Foundation happened in February. Sophie stood in front of Helen Park and 3 other board members, her laptop connected to the projector, her notes spread across the table. Ethan sat in the back of the room, watching. He'd offered to leave, said this was her thing, but she'd insisted he stay. You're as much a part of this as I am, she'd said. They need to see that. Now she walked them through the proposal. The site they'd identified, an old industrial lot on the east side that the city was willing to sell cheap, the architectural plans David had helped them develop, the financial projections Marcus had run a dozen times, the community input sessions Karen had organized, and then she showed them the people. Photos of Lisa Torres and her sons in their house. Carlos holding his first paycheck from a contracting job he'd gotten after finishing the training program. Jasmine and her kids in their new temporary unit, smiling despite everything they'd been through. This isn't just about housing, Sophie said. It's about rebuilding the systems that failed these people in the first place. It's about creating opportunities instead of just filling gaps. And it's about doing it in partnership with the community, not for them. Helen Park leaned forward. The budget you're proposing is significant. $3 million over 2 years, that's a big ask. I know. But the return is bigger. 60 families housed, 100 people trained, a model that other cities can replicate. This isn't charity, it's investment. One of the other board members, a man named Richard Chen, spoke up. What happens if it fails? If the funding dries up, or the community doesn't support it, or the city changes its mind? Sophie didn't hesitate. Then we adapt. We've already proven we can do that. We've faced setbacks, made mistakes, learned from them. That's not going to change. But the alternative is doing nothing, and I'm not willing to accept that anymore. Richard nodded slowly, and Sophie could see him processing, could see all of them processing. We'll need to discuss this internally, Helen said, but I'll be honest. I'm impressed. You've thought through the challenges, you've built something real. That matters. Thank you. We'll be in touch within 2 weeks. The meeting ended. Sophie packed up her things, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Ethan walked over. You killed it, he said quietly. I have no idea if that's true. It is. Trust me. They walked out of the building together into the cold February afternoon, and Sophie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. Now we wait, she said. Yeah, now we wait. The call came 9 days later. Sophie was at one of the houses helping paint a bedroom when her phone rang. She saw Helen Park's name on the screen and felt her heart stop. I need to take this, she said to Karen, who was painting beside her. She stepped outside, answered the call. Helen. Sophie, I have news. Okay? The board voted this morning. We're approving your proposal, full funding, $3 million over 2 years with the possibility of extension if the metrics support it. Sophie sat down on the front steps, her legs suddenly unsteady. Are you serious? Completely. Congratulations, you've earned this. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, but I believe you can do it. We all do. After the call ended, Sophie sat there for a long moment, staring at her phone. Then she called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. Yeah? We got it. Silence. Then, say that again. We got it, all of it, $3 million. They said yes. She heard him exhale, a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. Holy shit. Yeah. We're really doing this. We're really doing this. I gotta call you back, Ethan said. I just need a second. Okay. He hung up. Sophie sat on the steps, the cold seeping through her jeans, and let herself feel it. The weight of what they'd just been given. The responsibility. The possibility. Karen opened the door behind her. Everything okay? Sophie looked up and she was crying, but she was smiling too. Yeah, everything's perfect. Mickey. The next 6 months were chaos in the best possible way. They broke ground on the development in March. The city showed up for the ceremony, the mayor, a couple of council members, reporters from the local news. Sophie gave a speech about opportunity and community. Ethan stood off to the side with Mia, who'd skipped school for the event and kept asking when they could start building. Soon, baby, he'd said. Real soon. By summer, the first buildings were going up. The construction crew they'd hired was a mix of professionals and people from their training program. Carlos among them, now working full-time as an apprentice electrician. Ethan spent half his days on site, troubleshooting problems, teaching when he could, learning alongside everyone else. Sophie split her time between fundraising, community meetings, and managing the endless logistics that came with a project this size. She'd hired 2 full-time staff members to help, an operations manager and a community liaison, but she was still working 70-hour weeks. One night in July, she fell asleep at her desk. Ethan found her there at 10 p.m., her head on her folded arms, her laptop still open. He grabbed a blanket from the closet and draped it over her shoulders, then sat down across from her and worked quietly on his own tasks. She woke up an hour later, disoriented. What time is it? 11. Why didn't you wake me? You needed the sleep. Sophie rubbed her face, looking at the blanket around her shoulders. You didn't have to stay. I know. She looked at him, and something passed between them, something that had been building for months, but neither of them had named. Ethan. Don't, he said quietly. Not yet. Why not? Because we've got enough going on without adding complicated to the list. And what if I want complicated? He smiled, but it was sad. Then we wait until things are less insane. Deal? Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to push, but she could see in his face that he meant it, and she respected him too much to ignore that. Deal, she said. The first families moved into the development in October, almost exactly 2 years after Ethan had met Sophie on that roadside. The opening event was bigger than Ethan had expected. News crews, foundation representatives, city officials. But the people who mattered most were the families walking into their new homes for the first time. Lisa Torres was one of them. She stood in the living room of her new apartment, bigger than the house they'd given her before, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that didn't leak, and cried. I didn't think this was real, she said to Ethan. I didn't think people like us got things like this. You do now, he said. How do I pay you back? You don't. You just live here, raise your kids, build something good. That's it? That's it. She hugged him, and Ethan felt something break open in his chest. This was why they'd done it. Not for the recognition or the funding or the headlines. For this moment. For this woman and her kids having a place to call home. Sophie found him later, standing outside watching the sun set over the development. You okay? She asked. Yeah, just taking it in. It's real, huh? Yeah, it's real. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sophie said, My father drove by earlier. Ethan looked at her. He did? Yeah, he didn't stop. Just slowed down, looked at the buildings, and kept going. You think he'll ever come around? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. She paused. But I realized I don't need him to. I used to think I did. Used to think his approval was the thing that would make this real. But it's already real. And I did it without him. Yeah, you did. We did, Sophie corrected. This wasn't just me. Wasn't just me either. She smiled. No, it was all of us. Us. By the time winter came around again, the development was fully operational. 60 families housed. The training center running classes 6 days a week. The childcare co-op serving 30 kids. The community garden producing vegetables that went straight to the residents. Ethan had been promoted, though he still wasn't sure what his actual title was, to Director of Operations. He spent his days managing maintenance, overseeing training programs, and talking to residents about what they needed. Mia was thriving. She'd made friends with kids from the development, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the kid whose dad was barely holding it together. She was just Mia, happy, stable, safe. One Saturday morning, Ethan was fixing a heater in one of the units when Sophie showed up. You busy? She asked. Always. What's up? I need your opinion on something. Okay. She handed him a folder. Inside were proposals from 3 different cities asking if they could replicate the model. Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland. They want us to consult, Sophie said. Help them build their own versions of this. Ethan flipped through the pages. That's big. I know. You want to do it? I don't know. Part of me thinks we should focus on what we've built here. Make sure it's sustainable before we spread ourselves thin. But another part of me thinks, if we can help other people do this, why wouldn't we? Ethan set the folder down. What do you think we should do? I think we should do both. Carefully. We don't abandon what we've built, but we share what we've learned. Help other people not make the same mistakes we did. That's a lot of work. Everything worth doing is. Ethan smiled. All right, let's do it. Spring came, and with it, a sense of momentum that felt unstoppable. The development was thriving. The replication projects were moving forward. The Riverside Foundation had approved another round of funding, and Sophie's mother had quietly become one of their biggest supporters, attending events and connecting them with donors who actually understood what they were trying to build. One afternoon in April, Sophie and Ethan sat in the courtyard of the development, watching residents come and go, kids playing on the new playground they'd installed. You ever think about that night? Sophie asked. Which one? The night we met on Route 17. Ethan smiled. Yeah, sometimes. What do you think about? How close I came to not stopping. How if I'd just kept walking, none of this would have happened. You would have found another way. Maybe. But it wouldn't have been this way. Sophie looked at him. I'm glad you stopped. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the community around them, voices, laughter, life happening in real time. I've been thinking about something, Sophie said. Yeah? About what you said last summer, about waiting until things were less insane. Ethan's heart picked up, just slightly. Yeah? Things are still insane. They're probably always going to be insane, but I don't want to wait anymore. He turned to face her fully. Sophie, I know what I'm saying. I know it's complicated, but I also know that you're the person I want to build things with. Not just this project. Everything. Ethan looked at her and he saw it all. The woman who'd pulled up in a broken BMW. The woman who'd refused to give up when her father tried to destroy what she was building. The woman who'd sat with him in the wreckage of a burned house and said they'd figure it out together. I want that too, he said quietly. I just didn't think that I'd feel the same way. Yeah, she smiled. I do. I have for a while. He reached over and took her hand, and it felt right in a way nothing else had in a long time. So what now? He asked. Now we keep building, together, whatever that looks like. Yeah, okay. They sat there, hands linked, watching the life they'd built move around them. And Ethan realized something that had been true for a while, but he was only now able to name. He wasn't drowning anymore. He was standing. He was building. He was part of something bigger than himself. And so was she. Got that? 2 years later, the development had become a model for affordable housing across the country. Ethan and Sophie had consulted on 12 similar projects in 8 different cities. The training program had graduated over 200 people, and Mia had just turned 13, growing into a person who understood what it meant to build something that mattered. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, Sophie and Ethan stood on the same stretch of Route 17 where it had all started. You remember what you asked me for that night? Sophie said. A croissant. Yeah, for your daughter. Still the best trade I ever made. She laughed. You gave up $300 for a pastry. I gave up $300 for something my kid needed. That's not the same thing. Sophie looked at him, and her expression was soft. That's what I fell in love with, you know. Not the gesture. The priority behind it. You knew what mattered. I didn't know anything. I was just trying to survive. Maybe. But you were doing it with dignity. And that's rare. They stood in silence for a moment, the road empty and quiet around them. You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd kept driving that night? Ethan asked. All the time. But then I remember I didn't keep driving. I stopped. And you showed up, and everything changed. For both of us. Yeah, for both of us. They walked back to the car, hand in hand, and drove back to the development. Back to the life they'd built together. Back to the families and the community, and the work that was never finished but always worth doing. Because that's what Ethan had learned in the years since that rainy night on Route 17. That survival wasn't just about keeping your head above water. It was about finding the people who'd help you swim. It was about building something strong enough to hold not just yourself, but everyone around you. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness, refusing money and asking for food instead, stopping for a stranger, choosing to see people as human instead of problems, could become the foundation for something extraordinary. Not because it was easy, not because it was guaranteed to work, but because it was right. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Mia started high school that fall, and on her first day, Ethan walked her to the bus stop. You nervous? He asked. A little. You're going to be great. She looked up at him. Dad? Yeah? Thank you for everything you did, for making sure we had a home, for not giving up. Ethan felt his throat tighten. You don't have to thank me for that. I know, but I want to. She hugged him, and then the bus pulled up, and she was gone, off to start the next chapter of her life. Ethan stood there watching the bus disappear, and he thought about the night he'd stood on this same corner with an eviction notice in his pocket, and no idea how he was going to feed his daughter the next day. And he thought about how far they'd come. Not because of luck, not because someone had swooped in and saved them, but because he'd kept showing up. Because Sophie had chosen to build something real instead of something easy. Because a community of people had come together and decided they were worth more than the systems that tried to break them. That was the lesson, he realized. The thing he'd want Mia to carry with her into whatever life she built. That you don't have to accept the world as it is. That you can build something better, even when people tell you it's impossible. That the smallest act of caring, a croissant instead of cash, a choice to stop instead of driving past, a decision to see someone's humanity instead of their circumstances, can ripple outward in ways you'll never fully measure. And that family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the people who show up. The people who build alongside you. The people who refuse to let you drown. Ethan pulled out his phone and texted Sophie. First day of high school, she's terrified and pretending she's not. Her response came fast. She's your kid. She'll be fine. Yeah, she will. Dinner tonight, my place? Sounds good. He pocketed the phone and started walking, not toward struggle, not toward survival, but toward the life they'd built together, messy and complicated and real, and worth every hard moment it had taken to get here. And that, Ethan thought, was everything. The new year arrived with snow, which was rare for the city, but somehow fitting. Ethan stood outside one of the houses on New Year's morning, watching Mia and a handful of other kids from the neighborhood build a lopsided snowman in the front yard. Their laughter cut through the cold air, sharp and bright, and he found himself smiling without meaning to. Sophie walked up beside him, her breath visible in the freezing air, holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street. Thought you could use this, she said, handing him one. Thanks. He took it, wrapping his hands around the warmth. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Yeah, I know the feeling. They stood there watching the kids, neither one saying much. It had become a comfortable thing between them, the silence. They'd spent so much time talking over the past year, planning, arguing, solving problems, that sometimes just standing together was enough. I've been thinking, Sophie said finally, about what comes next. Ethan glanced at her. We've got the audit results. Helen's happy. Your mom's funding is coming through. What else is there to think about? Expansion. Real expansion. We've proven the model works on a small scale. 22 houses, 53 people housed, 18 people through the training program, but that's just a drop in the ocean. So we add more drops. Or we build something bigger. Ethan turned to face her fully. How much bigger? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed him a document she'd been working on. Plans for a full residential development. 60 units. Mixed income housing, on-site childcare, job training center, community spaces. This is what I'm proposing to the Riverside Foundation, she said. With my mother's backing and their support, we could actually build this. Not in 5 years, in 2. Ethan stared at the plans, feeling something rise in his chest that might have been excitement or terror. Maybe both. That's ambitious. Too ambitious? I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. He looked at her. I'm thinking it's a hell of a lot of work. I'm thinking it's risky. I'm thinking we could fail spectacularly. He paused. I'm also thinking we should do it. Sophie smiled, and it was the real smile, the one that made her look younger and less tired. Yeah? Yeah, but we do it right this time. No cutting corners, no rushing. We build it the way it's supposed to be built. Agreed. And we bring the families into the planning, not just as residents, as partners, people who actually have a say in what this thing becomes. Sophie nodded slowly. I like that. A lot. Good. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it different from every other development project out there. That's the point. Mia ran up to them, her face red from the cold, her coat covered in snow. Dad, come help us. The snowman's falling over. Ethan handed his coffee to Sophie and followed his daughter into the yard. Sophie watched him go, watched him crouch down with the kids and start rebuilding the snowman's base, his hands moving with the same careful precision he brought to everything. She pulled out her phone and started making notes. There was work to do, a lot of it. But for the first time since this whole thing started, she felt like they were building towards something that could actually last. The presentation to the Riverside Foundation happened in February. Sophie stood in front of Helen Park and 3 other board members, her laptop connected to the projector, her notes spread across the table. Ethan sat in the back of the room, watching. He'd offered to leave, said this was her thing, but she'd insisted he stay. "You're as much a part of this as I am," she'd said. "They need to see that." Now she walked them through the proposal. The site they'd identified, an old industrial lot on the east side that the city was willing to sell cheap. The architectural plans David had helped them develop. The financial projections Marcus had run a dozen times. The community input sessions Karen had organized. And then she showed them the people, photos of Lisa Torres and her sons in their house. Carlos holding his first paycheck from a contracting job he'd gotten after finishing the training program. Jasmine and her kids in their new temporary unit, smiling despite everything they'd been through. "This isn't just about housing," Sophie said. "It's about rebuilding the systems that failed these people in the first place. It's about creating opportunities instead of just filling gaps. And it's about doing it in partnership with the community, not for them." Helen Park leaned forward. "The budget you're proposing is significant. $3 million over 2 years. That's a big ask." "I know, but the return is bigger. 60 families housed, 100 people trained, a model that other cities can replicate. This isn't charity, it's investment." One of the other board members, a man named Richard Chen, spoke up. "What happens if it fails? If the funding dries up, or the community doesn't support it, or the city changes its mind?" Sophie didn't hesitate. "Then we adapt. We've already proven we can do that. We've faced setbacks, made mistakes, learned from them. That's not going to change. But the alternative is doing nothing, and I'm not willing to accept that anymore." Richard nodded slowly, and Sophie could see him processing, could see all of them processing. "We'll need to discuss this internally," Helen said. "But I'll be honest, I'm impressed. You've thought through the challenges. You've built something real. That matters." "Thank you. We'll be in touch within 2 weeks." The meeting ended. Sophie packed up her things, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Ethan walked over. "You killed it," he said quietly. "I have no idea if that's true." "It is. Trust me." They walked out of the building together into the cold February afternoon, and Sophie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. "Now we wait," she said. "Yeah, now we wait." The call came 9 days later. Sophie was at one of the houses, helping paint a bedroom, when her phone rang. She saw Helen Park's name on the screen and felt her heart stop. "I need to take this," she said to Karen, who was painting beside her. She stepped outside, answered the call. "Helen." "Sophie, I have news." "Okay." "The board voted this morning. We're approving your proposal, full funding. $3 million over 2 years with the possibility of extension if the metrics support it." Sophie sat down on the front steps, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Are you serious?" "Completely. Congratulations, you've earned this." Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. You've got a lot of work ahead of you. But I believe you can do it. We all do." After the call ended, Sophie sat there for a long moment, staring at her phone. Then she called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. "Yeah?" "We got it." Silence. Then, "Say that again." "We got it, all of it, 3 million. They said yes." She heard him exhale, a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. "Holy shit. Yeah. We're really doing this. We're really doing this. I gotta call you back," Ethan said. I just need a second." "Okay." He hung up. Sophie sat on the steps, the cold seeping through her jeans, and let herself feel it. The weight of what they'd just been given. The responsibility. The possibility. Karen opened the door behind her. "Everything okay?" Sophie looked up and she was crying, but she was smiling too. "Yeah, everything's perfect." Arshik. The next 6 months were chaos in the best possible way. They broke ground on the development in March. The city showed up for the ceremony, the mayor, a couple of council members, reporters from the local news. Sophie gave a speech about opportunity and community. Ethan stood off to the side with Mia, who'd skipped school for the event and kept asking when they could start building. "Soon, baby," he'd said. "Real soon." By summer, the first buildings were going up. The construction crew they'd hired was a mix of professionals, and people from their training program. Carlos among them, now working full-time as an apprentice electrician. Ethan spent half his days on site, troubleshooting problems, teaching when he could, learning alongside everyone else. Sophie split her time between fundraising, community meetings, and managing the endless logistics that came with a project this size. She'd hired 2 full-time staff members to help, an operations manager and a community liaison, but she was still working 70-hour weeks. One night in July, she fell asleep at her desk. Ethan found her there at 10 p.m., her head on her folded arms, her laptop still open. He grabbed a blanket from the closet and draped it over her shoulders, then sat down across from her and worked quietly on his own tasks. She woke up an hour later, disoriented. "What time is it?" 11. "Why didn't you wake me?" "You needed the sleep." Sophie rubbed her face, looking at the blanket around her shoulders. "You didn't have to stay." "I know." She looked at him, and something passed between them, something that had been building for months but neither of them had named. "Ethan." "Don't," he said quietly. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because we've got enough going on without adding complicated to the list." "And what if I want complicated?" He smiled, but it was sad. "Then we wait until things are less insane. Deal?" Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to push, but she could see in his face that he meant it, and she respected him too much to ignore that. "Deal," she said. The first families moved into the development in October, almost exactly 2 years after Ethan had met Sophie on that roadside. The opening event was bigger than Ethan had expected. News crews, foundation representatives, city officials. But the people who mattered most were the families walking into their new homes for the first time. Lisa Torres was one of them. She stood in the living room of her new apartment, bigger than the house they'd given her before, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that didn't leak, and cried. "I didn't think this was real," she said to Ethan. "I didn't think people like us got things like this." "You do now," he said. "How do I pay you back?" "You don't. You just live here, raise your kids, build something good." "That's it?" "That's it." She hugged him, and Ethan felt something break open in his chest. This was why they'd done it, not for the recognition or the funding or the headlines. For this moment, for this woman and her kids having a place to call home. Sophie found him later, standing outside watching the sun set over the development. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just taking it in." "It's real, huh?" "Yeah, it's real." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sophie said, "My father drove by earlier." Ethan looked at her. "He did?" "Yeah, he didn't stop, just slowed down, looked at the buildings, and kept going." "You think he'll ever come around?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not." She paused. "But I realized I don't need him to. I used to think I did. Used to think his approval was the thing that would make this real. But it's already real, and I did it without him." "Yeah, you did." "We did," Sophie corrected. "This wasn't just me." "Wasn't just me either," she smiled. "No, it was all of us." By the time winter came around again, the development was fully operational. 60 families housed. The training center running classes 6 days a week. The childcare co-op serving 30 kids. The community garden producing vegetables that went straight to the residents. Ethan had been promoted, though he still wasn't sure what his actual title was, to Director of Operations. He spent his days managing maintenance, overseeing training programs, and talking to residents about what they needed. Mia was thriving. She'd made friends with kids from the development, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the kid whose dad was barely holding it together. She was just Mia, happy, stable, safe. One Saturday morning, Ethan was fixing a heater in one of the units when Sophie showed up. "You busy?" she asked. "Always. What's up?" "I need your opinion on something." "Okay." She handed him a folder. Inside were proposals from 3 different cities asking if they could replicate the model. Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland. "They want us to consult," Sophie said. "Help them build their own versions of this." Ethan flipped through the pages. "That's big." "I know." "You want to do it?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks we should focus on what we've built here. Make sure it's sustainable before we spread ourselves thin. But another part of me thinks, if we can help other people do this, why wouldn't we?" Ethan set the folder down. "What do you think we should do?" "I think we should do both, carefully. We don't abandon what we've built, but we share what we've learned. Help other people not make the same mistakes we did. That's a lot of work. Everything worth doing is. Ethan smiled. All right, let's do it. So, spring came, and with it, a sense of momentum that felt unstoppable. The development was thriving. The replication projects were moving forward. The Riverside Foundation had approved another round of funding, and Sophie's mother had quietly become one of their biggest supporters, attending events and connecting them with donors who actually understood what they were trying to build. One afternoon in April, Sophie and Ethan sat in the courtyard of the development, watching residents come and go, kids playing on the new playground they'd installed. "You ever think about that night?" Sophie asked. "Which one?" "The night we met, on Route 17. Ethan smiled. "Yeah, sometimes." "What do you think about?" "How close I came to not stopping. How if I just kept walking, none of this would have happened." "You would have found another way. Maybe. But it wouldn't have been this way." Sophie looked at him. "I'm glad you stopped." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the community around them, voices, laughter, life happening in real time. "I've been thinking about something," Sophie said. "Yeah?" "About what you said. Last summer. About waiting until things were less insane." Ethan's heart picked up, just slightly. "Yeah? Things are still insane. They're probably always going to be insane. But I don't want to wait anymore." He turned to face her fully. "Sophie, I know what I'm saying. I know it's complicated. But I also know that you're the person I want to build things with. Not just this project. Everything." Ethan looked at her, and he saw it all. The woman who'd pulled up in a broken BMW. The woman who'd refused to give up when her father tried to destroy what she was building. The woman who'd sat with him in the wreckage of a burned house and said they'd figure it out together. "I want that too," he said quietly. "I just didn't think that I'd feel the same way." "Yeah," she smiled. "I do. I have for a while." He reached over and took her hand, and it felt right in a way nothing else had in a long time. "So what now?" he asked. "Now we keep building. Together, whatever that looks like." "Yeah, okay." They sat there, hands linked, watching the life they'd built move around them. And Ethan realized something that had been true for a while, but he was only now able to name. He wasn't drowning anymore. He was standing. He was building. He was part of something bigger than himself. And so was she. Wakam. The moment that changed everything for Alexander Bennett came on a Thursday in June. He was driving through the east side on his way to a meeting when traffic forced him to detour past the development. He'd avoided it deliberately for months, told himself he didn't care what his daughter was wasting her life on. But now, stuck at a red light, he had no choice but to look. What he saw made him pull over. The buildings were clean, well-maintained, surrounded by gardens and playgrounds. People were sitting on benches, talking. Kids were riding bikes. There was a sign for the community center, another for the training program. It looked, and he hated admitting this even to himself, successful. He sat there for 10 minutes, just watching. Watching a young man who looked like Carlos. He remembered the name from Sophie's presentations, though he'd pretended not to pay attention. Walk out of one of the buildings in a work uniform, lunchbox in hand. Watching a woman push a stroller while talking on the phone, smiling. Watching what looked like a small business open in one of the ground floor commercial spaces. This wasn't charity. This wasn't his daughter playing at activism. This was real. His phone rang. "Catherine." He almost didn't answer, but he did. "Where are you?" she asked. "Stuck in traffic." "Liar. I can hear in your voice you're parked somewhere." He closed his eyes. 35 years of marriage, and she could still read him over the phone. "I'm at Sophie's development." Silence. Then, "And?" "And it's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Failure, chaos, proof that I was right." "Are you finding that?" He looked out at the scene in front of him, at the stability, at the life happening in a place that shouldn't exist according to every business principle he'd ever believed in. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." "Then maybe it's time you admitted you were wrong." "I don't know if I can do that." "Yes, you can. You're just scared."
Of what? Of realizing that your daughter became a better person than you ever were.
The words hit him like a punch. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She invited me to an event next month, Catherine continued. A graduation for the training program. I'm going. You should come with me. She won't want me there. You don't know that, but you'll never find out if you don't try. After they hung up, Alexander sat in his car for another 20 minutes. Then he drove away, but the image of what he'd seen stayed with him. Koshik. The graduation ceremony was small but meaningful. 23 people completing the training program ready to enter the workforce with real skills. Ethan stood at the front with Sophie, handing out certificates, shaking hands, watching people who'd been struggling 6 months ago now stepping into futures they'd built for themselves. Carlos was among the graduates. When Ethan handed him his certificate, Carlos pulled him into a hug. Thank you, man, for everything. You did the work. I just showed you where to start. Nah, you showed me I was worth the effort. That's bigger. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Yeah, you are. After the ceremony, there was food and music and celebration in the courtyard. Ethan was talking to Lisa Torres when he saw Sophie freeze, her eyes fixed on something across the courtyard. He followed her gaze and saw them, Alexander and Catherine Bennett, standing at the edge of the crowd, looking out of place but present. You want me to... Ethan started. No, I got this. Sophie walked over to her parents, and Ethan watched from a distance, ready to intervene if she needed him. Catherine hugged Sophie immediately, but Alexander stood stiff, uncertain. Sophie looked at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You came, Sophie said finally. Your mother insisted. And you? I wanted to see it, what you've built. And? Alexander looked around at the courtyard, at the families, at the graduates, at the life happening in this space his daughter had created from nothing. I was wrong, he said, and the words sounded like they cost him something. About you. About this. About what matters. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I didn't do this to prove you wrong. I know, that's what makes it worse. You did it because you believed in it, and you were right. I'm still figuring it out, we all are. But you're doing it. That's more than I can say for most of the projects I've funded. Sophie looked at her father, and Ethan could see years of hurt and anger and disappointment fighting with the small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. You want to stay? She asked. There's food. People you could meet. Alexander glanced at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at Sophie. Yeah, I'd like that. Ethan watched Sophie introduce her father to Lisa, to Carlos, to Karen, and David and Marcus. Watched Alexander Bennett, the man who'd tried to destroy this project, actually listen to the people it had helped, actually see them as people instead of numbers. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. 2 years later, Ethan stood in front of a crowd of 200 people at a conference in Detroit. He was there to talk about the development, about what had worked, and what hadn't. About how other cities could build similar programs. Public speaking still terrified him, but Sophie had insisted he was the right person for this. And she was sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly, so he pushed through. The thing people don't understand about poverty, he said, is that it's not just about money. It's about choices. Or the lack of them. When you're broke, every decision becomes impossible. Do you pay rent or buy groceries? Fix your car or take your kid to the doctor? And the system is designed to punish you no matter what you choose. He paused, looking out at the audience. What we built wasn't about giving people money. It was about giving them choices. A place to live that didn't take 70% of their income. Training that led to real jobs. Childcare so they could actually work. We didn't fix poverty, but we gave people the tools to fix their own lives, and that's different. After his talk, dozens of people approached him with questions. City officials, nonprofit directors, people who wanted to replicate what they'd done. Ethan answered as best he could, directed them to Sophie when they had questions he couldn't handle, and felt the strange, surreal weight of being someone other people looked to for answers. That night, back in their hotel room, Sophie sat on the bed with her laptop, reviewing notes from the conference. Ethan stood at the window looking out at the Detroit skyline. You did good today, she said. I was nervous as hell. Didn't show. Liar. She smiled. Okay, it showed a little, but you still killed it. He turned to face her. You know what's weird? What? 3 years ago, I was a mechanic who couldn't pay his rent. Now I'm standing in front of hundreds of people talking about housing policy. How did that happen? You showed up, you kept showing up, and you cared enough to learn. So did a lot of people. Why me? Sophie set down her laptop and walked over to him. Because you understand what it's like to need help. And because you never forgot that, even after things got better. That's rare. Ethan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I know, I'm amazing. He laughed. Yeah, you are. They stood there for a moment, the city lights spreading out below them, two people who'd found each other in the worst moment and built something neither of them could have built alone. Marry me, Ethan said suddenly. Sophie pulled back to look at him. What? Marry me. I don't have a ring. I didn't plan this, but I don't want to wait anymore. Ethan, I love you. I love building things with you. I love the life we've made, and I want to keep making it, officially. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You're serious. Completely. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one you're getting. She laughed, and it was the sound he loved most in the world. Yes. Obviously, yes. He kissed her, and it felt like every hard thing they'd been through had led to this moment, this choice, this future. Asham. They got married 6 months later in the courtyard of the development, surrounded by the families they'd helped and the team they'd built. Mia was Sophie's maid of honor, beaming in a dress Catherine had bought her. Carlos officiated. Lisa Torres made the cake. It was small and imperfect and exactly right. Alexander Bennett showed up, which surprised everyone, including Sophie. He didn't give a speech, but he shook Ethan's hand and said, "Take care of her." "I will," Ethan said. "And let her take care of you. She's better at this than either of us ever gave her credit for." "I know." Alexander nodded, and something that looked almost like respect passed between them. The development continued to grow. By the 5th anniversary of that night on Route 17, they'd expanded to 3 sites across the city, housing over 200 families. The training program had graduated nearly 500 people. 12 other cities had successfully replicated the model. And Ethan and Sophie kept building, not because it was easy, not because they had all the answers, but because they'd learned something that changed everything, that the systems that break people aren't inevitable. They're choices. And if they're choices, they can be changed. It took work. It took time. It took failing and learning and trying again, but it was possible. And that possibility, that stubborn, defiant belief that things could be better, was worth everything. Bonk. 10 years after that rainy night on Route 17, Ethan stood in front of the first house they'd ever renovated. Lisa Torres had moved out years ago, into a place she'd bought herself with money saved from a job she'd gotten through their program. But the house was still there, still serving families, still part of the foundation they'd built. Sophie walked up beside him, gray starting to show in her hair, lines around her eyes from years of smiling and working and building. "You thinking about that night?" she asked. "Always." "What about it?" "How different everything could have been. If you'd driven past, if I'd said no, if either of us had made one different choice." "But we didn't." "No, we didn't." They stood in silence, watching a new family move into the house. A single father with 2 kids carrying boxes up the front steps, looking tired but hopeful. "Think he knows what he's getting into?" Sophie asked. "No, but that's okay. We didn't either." She took his hand. "No regrets?" "Not one." "Me neither." They walked back to their car, leaving the house behind, but carrying its lessons forward. The lesson that one moment of kindness can echo for years. That people aren't broken, systems are. That building something that lasts requires more than money. It requires seeing people as human, treating them with dignity, and refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable. Ethan had learned those lessons the hard way. In the cold apartment with the eviction notice. On the roadside with a broken car and a stranger who chose to stop. In the years of struggle and setback and small victories that added up to something bigger than either of them had imagined. And now, looking at the life they'd built, The families housed, the people trained, the systems changed, the future that existed because they'd refused to accept the world as it was. He understood something fundamental about what it means to be human. We're all just one bad break away from needing help, and we're all one act of decency away from being the person who provides it. The choice between those two realities isn't made by governments or corporations or systems. It's made by individuals, by people who see someone struggling and decide to stop instead of driving past, by people who refuse $300 and ask for a croissant instead, because feeding your kid matters more than your pride, by people who take a chance on someone who's drowning and say, let's figure this out together. That night on Route 17, Ethan and Sophie had both made choices. Small choices that felt insignificant at the time. But those choices had rippled outward, changing lives, building communities, proving that another way was possible. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not the money or the recognition or the headlines. Just the simple, profound act of choosing to see each other's humanity and responding to it with grace. That's what Ethan would remember. That's what he'd teach Mia. That's what would outlast buildings and programs and all the structures they'd created. The knowledge that we're all connected, that we all matter, and that the smallest act of kindness can become the foundation for something extraordinary. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. And sometimes that's enough.